Hello, this is Mark Galeotti of the Centre for European Security at the Institute of International Relations, Prague, with a very short take trying desperately to find some upbeat things to say about Donald Trump's visit to NATO. After all, on the surface, that's a bit of a hard sell. We had the spectacle of him feeling it was appropriate to lecture other NATO leaders about the fact that they didn't spend enough on their defence, and they apparently seem to owe America. It's a shame he wasn't able to muster the same censorious attitude when talking to the Saudis about their human rights record. And even while a new monument to Article 5, the NATO guarantee of mutual security, was being inaugurated, he felt it possible to not actually reaffirm American support for Article 5, even though the only time Article 5 has actually been invoked was, of course, after 9/11, when European countries, those underpaying ones, were generous and effusive and immediate in their offers of support and actual practical support for the United States. As you can tell, I'm not a particularly happy bunny. However, in some ways, rather than just simply get caught up in the outrage and annoyance of the situation, let's try and just bring up some reasons to be cheerful, some little tatters of silver lining in this particular cloud. First of all, there is the fact that there is some truth in Donald Trump's complaints about European spending on defence. They have, to a considerable extent, got used to, first of all, assuming that Russia and the rest of the world do not pose any kind of threat. And although I don't actually think that Russia poses a military threat, it clearly poses a wider security challenge. And to a degree, they've also been quite happy to shelter beneath the American umbrella. So now they are being forced to actually get more serious about it, and we are seeing a whole series of commitments, not just to hitting the 2% defence spending, 2% of GDP, that is the NATO benchmark. And we should mention, by the way, this is not actually like a NATO requirement. It's not that these are countries who are sort of underpaying. It was that this is what NATO said, we think this is what every country should be aiming for. It's questionable whether 2%, which is in many ways an arbitrary figure, is the best way of measuring it, and there are other things also to consider, but still, it is a start. And it's not just about hitting 2%, it's about thinking, well, how do you spend this money? What do we need it for? A shift away from light intervention forces towards the kind of forces that can represent a meaningful, credible deterrent for the European mainland. So Europe is getting more serious, and that also means obviously sort of greater coordination and cooperation between countries, especially as we have to consider the sort of slightly fraught potential outcomes from Brexit if the negotiations get really acrimonious, given that Britain is definitely the sort of the key military force supplier of Europe. Anyway, that's number one. Number two, in some ways, I think it is useful in the sense of it undermines Trump at home. Let's be honest, America really now has lost its old two-party political system. What we have are three parties. There is Trump, the Democrats, and the Republicans. And at the moment, the government is a coalition government of Trump and the Republicans. And like all coalitions, it has its weaknesses and its shear lines. And one of them, I think, is precisely that, in fact, NATO still remains an iconic institution for many within the Republican Party, and, of course, many Democrats as well. And therefore, I think will become another one of these weak flank issues that at some point Trump will probably find himself forced to strengthen. So I think in some ways the more he alarms Republicans by seeming to be lukewarm on NATO, the more pushback he will get, the more pressure he will get to actually have to, somewhere down the line, reassert itself. And it's interesting, even in that thing, and this is my sort of third little silver lining piece, is that at least Trump did use the formulation threat from Russia. Now, I think that's important. He has, for bizarre reasons, I don't think it's because of any tapes or financial inducements, but anyway, he has twisted and twisted to try and avoid using these words. Again, I think because of domestic pressure, he's being forced more and more into a position in which he actually has to formally and openly recognise that there is indeed a threat to the West from Russia, and the fact that he's used those words are significant. Even though we know that Trump can use totally different words tomorrow and the day after and basically even reinvent the past, nonetheless, for here and now, it is a statement that is important and significant. And the final point is we also saw, and in part this was part of the whole kind of keep the baby happy sort of process, which is actually that NATO did formally commit itself to supporting operations, coalition operations in Afghanistan. Now, on the whole, this is essentially a piece of political tokenism. It's a moral statement more than a practical one. But nonetheless, what I think it does do is help slightly dilute the current sense that, once again, NATO is an anti-Russian alliance, which clearly Russia uses in its propaganda, both at home and abroad, by actually restating the point that, in fact, NATO looks towards many vectors. NATO looks towards the issue of instability in the Middle East and North Africa. NATO looks at what's going on in Afghanistan and sort of trying to address potential well springs of terrorism at home, as well as clearly responding to an increasingly aggressive and assertive Russia, I think is no bad thing of actually sort of reasserting the fact that NATO is essentially a security alliance, not an anti-Russian alliance. Now, it's up to you to decide how substantial you regard these little fragments of hope that I can provide, but I just think it's a useful exercise sometimes, rather than just to get sort of caught up in the European angst about what on earth Trump means for the rest of us. We shall see how this plays out. Thank you very much for watching. This is Mark Galeotti of the Institute of International Relations, Prague.